Hello, hello. I've been trying to get to you, and for whatever reason, they says my internet is unstable. Nothing well is better than saying the user is unstable. Okay, so hopefully we're on here together now. I see lots of you out there. We're going to be talking about the new forms. Actually, there's only three in South Carolina, but we're going to go from the perspective of the listing side this session, because we want to talk about the listing agreements first, and then I want to talk to you about the new forms and how you as a listing agent will be using them or will be faced with them. I've already had 2 or 3 questions just this morning from listing agents who are trying to figure out what to do with these new forms. So I am so glad you all are here. Hey, Jeff, I'm glad you made it, dear. And several of you, I'm going to go ahead and see if we can start sharing these forms, because gosh, we've got a lot to cover today. So hang in there, and I promise I'll try not to lose you. Okay, let's see. Being that I've got an unstable internet, we might all get lost, but hopefully not. Let's see. Aha. Let's see if I see you. There you are. There you're coming in. Cool. This is pretty good. So now can you all see the forms? Somebody raise their hands if they can see the forms. Cool. All right. I always kind of like to start with some of those basic forms that we use and that we have with our initial forms. And so I'm going to pull these up for you first, and then we'll kind of go through the others. I have updated our comparable forms. This little cheat sheet it's handy for me, and I hope it's handy for you. If you know the title of the form that you want to use in North Carolina, then if you look on the left side, then go across the page and you'll see there the South Carolina name of the forms. Okay, so hey, Whitney, how are you? Gosh, I haven't seen you forever. So make sure that you, like I say, if you know the names of the forms in one of the states, you can find the corresponding form in the others. I tell you what, just the names of the forms are so confusing. After you get to know the name, it's not so confusing, but trying to correlate it initially it is. So this little form will be a good cheat sheet for you. We will have this updated again as of July 1. North Carolina is updating their forms as of July 1. We still do not have a list of the forms that are being updated. However, we will probably know that pretty soon. So just don't get too attached to this particular one, because I've updated the South Carolina forms on here. All right. I'm not going to go through it because it's pretty self-explanatory. Now let's go down to the next form. This is your listing file checklist. I'm going to show you in a moment. We also have a listing sale checklist. Okay, this is the listing checklist. This is the one that we use in the market center as far as having something in print. We have the listing checklist on command. But it's in the system. So I want you all to have the checklist. And again, I've only updated the forms that have needed to go into place as of June the 13th. June the 16th, we are 3 days past the day it starts. And so that's why I went ahead and updated the checklist even before we get too far into the year. These checklists with multicolored checklists, I basically want to give you a process, pretty much which forms you're going to use, and maybe an option of a form. You may or may not be using that particular form, but you might need a corresponding form. So I've given you hints as to which forms you would use in these different steps. And as I said, you're going to go down the left side pretty much so, and then you're going to come up here and go down the right side, and it'll kind of give you a process or a timeline as to how you're going to use the forms. All right. All right, let's scooch on down here now. I didn't intentionally leave that blank. It just was there. Now let's talk just briefly about our exclusive right to sell. The exclusive right to sell is the tool that you're going to need to use to actually do your listing. Now, before we get into the listing, let me go over here to this other file, and this is called your initial folder. When you start to work with a client, you all know that the first thing you have to do is be able to get to the forms. You see this little application form right here? Most of you probably are already members of the South Carolina Association of Realtors, but until you are, you cannot use their forms. South Carolina and North Carolina now have their forms copyrighted, and only members of those respective associations have access to the forms. So when you go into dotloop, if you're brand new, which some of you are, if you're brand new and you go into dotloop and you can't get into your South Carolina forms, that's a scary thing. It's like, oh my gosh, my forms should be in dotloop. Well, they're there, but you have to connect to dotloop through the NARDS number, the NRDS number. That's the number for the national database of the National Association of Realtors. So once it is included, that your membership is included in NAR as a South Carolina Association of Realtors member, then you can connect with your South Carolina forms. If you're having some trouble with that, shoot me an email and I will send you over a little video that will help you get that connection, okay? But you are the ones going to have to do the application to join the South Carolina Association of Realtors. It's $140 a year, and right now it's prorated. So right now, if you were to join, it'd be more like half. Let's say, what's this, June? You would pay $90 plus your 25, so it'd be 115 rather than 140. Now, every January, we get the opportunity to renew our membership in all these associations. So next January, you're going to get to pay just the 140. Obviously, this is a one-time fee. I'm not going to go through the applications because obviously you'll have to process through it as needed. There is a website now that we can do it online, and I can get that out to you if you'd rather do it online. Anyway, this is the application form. I just needed to remind you of that. Now, this is the listing sale file list, as I just referred to you. That's, again, one of your initial forms. You want to come down here, and the next thing you want to look at beyond those two I just showed you, is the South Carolina Disclosure of Real Estate Brokerage Relationships. South Carolina doesn't only offer agency relationships. They also offer something called transaction brokerage. We as a firm have elected not to engage in transaction brokerage. But the reason the name of this title is not like your North Carolina. See, in North Carolina, it's working with real estate agents, right? But in South Carolina, it talks about the brokerage relationships because it's not going to be based on agency according to this disclosure. They'll have an option. They don't have an option with our firm. We don't do transaction brokerage. We work on an agency relationship only. That's our business model. But I do like this form. Yeah, and I tell you what I like about it. I like it because it points out very clearly and simply. You start out as a customer of the brokerage firm. After you're a customer, then you're going to go, oops, I think I lost you. Are you there? I don't see you. I hope my unstable internet doesn't kick you out. Are you there? Let's see. There you are. Okay, you came back. Okay. Did it go off for a minute for y'all? It went off for me. Did it go off for y'all? No? All right. It's just going to test my patience today, isn't it? It's still saying my internet connection. Well, thank you, AT&T. Right. Okay. There we back on page. All right. What I was saying was I like the simple presentation. Everyone has a concept of the word customer versus client. You know, we might not have it in full detail, but we do have a concept of a customer versus a client. So it tells you initially you're going to start out as a customer and you're going to be treated fairly and ethically and honestly. But at the same token, there's not going to be any loyalty or confidentiality, all those fiduciary duties. They do not go with a customer relationship. And under that customer relationship, you'll see this paragraph. I've highlighted some of these on the transaction brokerage. This is where you're going to explain that our firm does not do, this is like a fee for service, you know, where they would charge $100 to do such and such or so and so. We don't do that. So just so you know that that's not a part of our model. Now, the next option is they can become a client. And if they become a client, they're going to have the fiduciary duties. You remember in pre-licensing the old car? Well, that's what you're going to show them on the top of page 2. These are the client level services or duties: the obedience, the loyalty, the disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill and care. These are the duties that you will offer them if they choose to be a client. Then under that client base, you're going to have a single agency, you can have a dual agency, you're going to have disclosed dual agency, and you're going to have designated agency. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail later. And I don't want you to go into too much detail when you first present this to a client, because obviously they don't want to hear all the details. They just want to see the house, okay? Or they just want to get on with it. But you do need to expose this. And this is the disclosure that by law, not by rule, by law, must be presented to everybody in the first substantial contact. So then you come down here and it says it's your choice. It's your choice whether you want to work with me individually, Mr. Seller, since we're talking about sellers today, or I'm going to let you know that if I were to get in a situation where I might be representing you and have the opportunity to represent a buyer also on your property, we would be in something called dual agency. But I will come back to you on that if we get into that situation. Thus the word disclosed dual agency. And designated agency basically means I would only represent you and my firm would have someone else to represent them as a buyer agent. So again, if we get in that opportunity, I'll come back to you and we'll talk about it at that time. So it's your choice now. You can choose to remain a customer, or you can choose to be a client, and you can choose our brokerage through a written agency agreement, which is the way we would work with Valentine agents. And then it says, if represented by the brokerage firms, you can decide whether to go under the shared services of dual agency or designated agency. And that's just about as much as you need to go into on this particular form. It's just a thumbnail sketch of our relationship. Again, point out this is not a contract, and get them to sign right here. And you, once you get that signature on there, you're going to upload it into an opportunity in Command. All these disclosures, whether it's North Carolina, working with real estate agents, or if it's South Carolina, the brokerage relationships, those must be on file. And they need to be in Command so that we can have them on file. So set you up an opportunity, and hopefully you'll be writing a listing agreement. Now, the other thing that you want to initially, you're probably going to need to talk to them about this 2 or 3 times. I mean, this wire fraud warning is so critical, and it is an individual form in South Carolina. It started it actually started in South Carolina. And it has been an individual form through these past 3 or 4 years. North Carolina incorporated the warning in the agency agreements and in the offer to purchase. But in South Carolina, it's still a standalone form, and it should be with every file, whether it's representing a buyer and or a seller. So you want this wire fraud warning form with all of your documents. And I would start out with that to show this. Basically, you're showing clients you are trying to take care of them and you're concerned about their well-being and their bank account. The most important thing about this wire fraud warning is that people understand that they need to do things verbally. Everything else we got to have in writing. But right now, if it has to do with the checking account, no, it doesn't need to be in writing. Faxes are not accepted, emails not accepted. The FBI continually warns us that we must go verbal when it has to do with an account number. Whether you're talking with someone at the bank that you know, or hopefully you know that you're with the right bank, not just a number that you've received in an email. Do not pay attention to that. Because that could be where a hacker's got into the emails. So you might want to make sure that you can explain this, and you can see where it's underlined, the things that are important for you to point out. So you just get familiar with how it needs to be worked, whether you're doing a due diligence fee or an earnest money, or what we're going to talk about today, a termination fee. Okay, now those are the primary forms you're going to have initially that you're going to work with. Now let's go back and look at this listing form. There's two things I want to point out to you off the bat. I'm not going to go through this one line by line today because we're going to do the extra forms. But when you are doing a listing agreement with someone in South Carolina and or North Carolina, the agreement is between the seller and the firm. It is not between the seller and a team. It's not between the seller and an individual agent. It is with the firm. And as you can see, it's clear and in writing that it would be with the seller, who's going to be right here, and Keller Williams Valentine would go in this blank right here, because that's the firm. You do not need to put Keller Williams Valentine dash Joe Smith agent. You do not need to put that. You are representing the firm. So again, firm name. Now, this little section right here, the reason I highlighted it, I wanted to hopefully to stick in your mind. When you take a listing, it has to have a term. It has to have a beginning and it has to have an end. The difference in the North Carolina and the South Carolina is when it begins. You have a date that the term begins, but then some of us are doing something called coming soon. And some of us are doing something called firm exclusive or office exclusive. So we need to know when the beginning date is for that term. Then in South Carolina, you need to put the date that you're going to do any type of exposure of that property. Back in let's see, was it May of 2020? The National Association of Realtors put into effect a new policy right in the middle, yes, of COVID. They introduced this policy, and it's called Clear Cooperation. And the intent of that policy was that anybody that's going to list has a right to have that listing in the MLS within 1 business day. Bottom line, that was the intent. Try to simplify it. And of course, we realtors always have some exceptions. And so, and what we were saying, or many of us were saying, hey, we can't get it in within 24 hours or within the 1 business day. We've got to get pictures done. We've got to get measurements done. We need to find out who supplies the water for water or the septic sewer. There's so many things we've got to find out. We just can't do it in 1 business day. So they have allowed something called coming soon. Now, we've always used coming soon as kind of a tease in the marketplace to say, okay, y'all watch for it, and it's gonna be here. So we kind of build the anticipation. That was not the design of NAR to allow us to do it. but it still has worked to some degree as a tease in the marketplace, but at the same time, allowing you time to do those basic things that you need to make sure that listing is accurate when you advertise to the public. And it's really kind of strange to me. I understand the words, but still my understanding is not wrapped around it. NAR does not consider MLS public. Like I say, I understand those words, but it's exposed to the public through the members. So when you put it in the coming soon, no show category, it is not considered public marketing. Public marketing would be when you have a sign in the yard without a rider saying coming soon, or it would be that you put it on your website without the words coming soon. Then that becomes public marketing. But if you put it on your website, and you can do that, you can put it on Facebook, you can put it anywhere that you want to, as long as you use the words coming soon. Now, let me tell you the real kicker on that one. When it says coming soon, that means coming soon, no show. It's not just coming soon. It's coming soon, no show. Nobody can get in to see that house. They can only see the details that you put out there on that house, like the pictures or whatever. So you definitely want to keep in mind that there is $1,000 fine if anybody is allowed to see that house during that coming soon no show. And guess who gets to pay the $1,000? It is assessed to the agent. So you do your dead level best. Do not let anybody in that house. And yes, we have had 2 different situations where our agent was fined $1,000. Our 2 agents were fined immediately $1,000. So I just caution you: don't let anybody into that house. The painter can't let anybody in the house. The stager can't. The babysitter can't, and certainly the seller can't. So, so just be cautious on that. Now, I've given you that explanation all to say, in South Carolina, the date that you put here, this October 15th, or whatever day, let's say it's June the 15th or 16th, this is the day that you're going to begin your coming soon advertising of whatever exposure. Let's put it, exposure is coming soon. That's the date that you're going to start coming soon. It is the beginning of the exposure of that listing anywhere, but it's not going to be to the public marketing. All right. Now, let me show you in the contract. Let's go over to the page where they put this. It's paragraph 10, I believe. Where is it? Let's see, right here. Where do you? Oh no, it's 13 in South Carolina. In the multiple listing service, you can either go active within 1 business day, or you can go coming soon within 1 business day of the seller signing the listing agreement. It's one or the other. Or there's an other option. It's called firm exclusive. Firm exclusive just means that no one outside of the agents in our firm can see that house. Now, there is a difference from the coming soon in the fact that you can show the house, when it's under firm exclusive. It can be shown. You cannot make the advertising public in the sense you cannot have a sign in the yard. You cannot put public marketing on Facebook as far as to anybody on Facebook. You can put it on the Facebook that's strictly for Valentine. It's called Official KW Valentine Facebook page. You can put it there. You can distribute emails to the agents in our office. You cannot cannot even talk about that to an agent of another firm. If you do, you have violated the clear cooperation policy, and there is a fine. It's not $1,000, but the penalty is you have to put it immediately out of firm exclusive, and it goes public into the active status in MLS. And see, at this point, you don't even have it in MLS. So this is just an overview, but I wanted to show you in your listing agreement where it is. And again, I'm going to show you in a moment those two forms. We'll kind of go over it a little bit more thoroughly because I'm sure I've kind of glossed over some things pretty quickly here. But just know that when you're filling out the listing agreement in this section, these are words that I added. It's not going to be, you won't see those words, but know that option 1 is you are either going to go active in MLS within 1 business day, or you're going to go with coming soon. If you don't do with coming soon, and you're going to work just with the agents in our office only, then you're going to go this option 2. Now, let's look at the MLS forms that allows you to do that. You have to have these forms filled in. Oh, just a minute, I need to go down here a little bit. This is what the forms look like. They have that blue box up the top, and these are canopy forms. These are not the state forms, but you still have to use them, all right? The coming soon authorization, that is the seller saying, I understand and agree that you can put it in the coming soon status in MLS without making it active for everybody. This is only for the members of MLS. So in this form, it's pretty self-explanatory. The main thing you want to keep in mind is the penalty if you show it, and it's in black and white right here. In fact, it may not be shown as in red. So here's your penalty right here. Down on the bottom, you're going to put the date right here that you're going to make it go active in the public. All right. So if the beginning date is October the 15th in South Carolina on this particular illustration, if that's the beginning term date, what day, you're going to put it in coming soon at that point, what day then are you going to make it a public date, the active date? What day? Let's say you're going to do it 2 weeks later. So we're going to, instead of October 15th, and you're going to put it in MLS is coming soon within 24 hours or business day, then you're going to make it active to the public on, what I say, 2 weeks, whether it be 14 days on October the 29th. Does that make sense? In South Carolina, the first date is the date that you could either go active or coming soon. And the date that goes in right here is the date that you're going to go into your public marketing. So that's again, a little different than what we do on the North Carolina side of putting a listing in. But kind of keep in mind what the process is. The process is either one or the other, active and coming soon, or active at a later date. And this is where the date you go out of coming soon into the public marketing. This form, let me show you this. This form on the bottom here, you see this title right down here at the bottom, the very last one? I think you can see it here. Did I pull it down far enough? That is the form called, excuse me, that blank is for the member participant. I, as the broker in charge of the firm, I'm the member participant. You're a subscriber on using the terms of MLS. So on this form, you sign it as the listing agent, and I sign it as the member participant. This form is signed by you, it's signed by the sellers, put the property address, and then you must send it to me to sign. When you're doing your DocuSign, you know, you can order the way you want the forms signed. And I really think it'd be a good idea when you put that order in, go ahead and get the seller's signatures first. And then you can send it to me to be able to get the signature. And this is supposed to be done within that one business day. So make sure that you have me included on the list. Don't wait till it's time for you to get paid and you want me to sign. I'm not going to do it. Okay? No, I'm teasing you. But the rule is that it be signed again within the one business day. And I'm the member participant. All right. Now that form is the coming soon form. The next one is the firm exclusive agreement. This is the form that must be signed if you're not going to expose it in coming soon. You're not going to expose it in public marketing. Only the agents in our firm is going to be able to sell it. And if you're going to do that, then you have to put this firm exclusive. What I have seen some of the agents do in order to give themselves longer than a few days in coming soon, to give themselves a longer period of time and to go ahead and get the listing agreement. Let's say your seller's not going to be ready to sell for 3 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever. They will go into a firm exclusive agreement. And then at the end of that time, when the seller is ready to put the house on the market, then we terminate the firm exclusive and go into the active or possibly even the coming soon. But generally we go from firm exclusive right into the active. So now this particular form, again, there is a difference. First of all, let me show you this. See this pattern here? You remember seeing this a while ago? We saw the seller's signature, the listing agent's name and signature. And looky here, there's another space that the member participant has to sign. Now this one is really more critical. This one is the one that you need to get this form to me within 2 business days, because I have to register this at Canopy. Even though only the firm is going to be selling it and it's not going in MLS, we have to register that we actually do have a legal binding listing agreement. And we have to register that with MLS so that if they get a call about a listing, then they can say, yes, there is a listing, but it is not open to the public. We have seen the listing agreement. So I have to register every single one of them. So make sure, again, put the order in which we need them signed. The order is the seller. You can sign it before or after, but put me last and make sure it's within 48 hours of the seller signing so that I can register it legally with MLS. Now, let me show you another couple of things. We're not going to put it in MLS initially, okay? Because the seller doesn't want it. It was designed for people who want privacy, but we have found more practical uses of it. But if the seller is okay with putting it in MLS after it closes, then they need to check this box. If they do not want it in MLS ever, then they would check it right here. The only reason we would put it in at that time is good for CMAs, so that you can, when you're going and you're looking at prices in the neighborhood, obviously it's very convenient and very handy for you to have all the sales in the area without having to go to tax records. But make sure that you get that approval. Again, MLS will kick it back to me when I try to register it if I cannot show that the seller has signed that. The only other thing that you're going to do is on each one of these boxes, you can see they're very serious about this thing. The sellers have to initial all these different sections. So it's like I said, they're pretty serious about these forms. What I need on it when I register it is the information right here. I have to see the listing agreement, knowing that we're the brokerage, and the seller's names, the address, just the general basic. I've got to have that and have this to send to them. Okay, so those are the 2 forms that you are option 1 and option 2 back in our listing agreement. number 10 under listing agreement. See, those are the two forms that you would use on this particular thing here. Now let's go back up here for at the beginning and see if we can take a look at this. As I said, you got to have a beginning date and you have to have an end date. And this beginning date can be modified only by going public with that other form. Now, this is the information you're going to get off of tax records. You may, please don't copy another listing. I tell you what, that's just like copying off of the star football players' test scores. You don't know if they're right or not, so don't do it. You know, you do your own research. You make sure that you find out the information and don't rely on somebody that's also just put in information in the MLS. This term, tax map, in South Carolina, that refers to the parcel ID. So when you pull up the tax records, look for something called tax map and look for the parcel ID. And those will be that long string of numbers generally. And you got to put that in there. Now, this little section right here, I just think this is, I mean, this is just amazing. In South Carolina, they have one word for fixtures, and it's fixtures. What definition do you have of fixtures? What is a fixture in South Carolina? Maybe it's anybody's guess sometimes. Well, so because there was not a definition, a couple of Bix and I put together a fixtures addendum to use internally. If that fixtures addendum is actually an in-house form, it is something that helps identify the things that the buyer expects to be left in the house, and you want to prepare the seller for to have an idea of the things that are left in the house. One of the older, a long time instructors at real estate schools in the South Carolina courses said, you know, if you could turn the house upside down, whatever falls out is not a fixture. If it stays with the house, if it's stuck with a house, then it's a fixture. And I said, well, at least I get a picture in my mind of what is a fixture. Those of you who finished pre-licensure school in North Carolina, you saw this long list of things. Well, that long list is going to look very similar to our fixtures addendum because it was pretty thorough. There is not a place in the South Carolina form here to identify those things otherwise. So if you'll notice here, it says all improvements, which typically is going to be the house, might be a barn, fixtures, there's that word, appurtenances, anything that's attached to the ground, and additional property. If there's another lot next door, you would want to make sure that you have the tax number for it as well. So the fixtures addendum, I'm not going to go through it today. I don't think we'll have time, but I'll show it to you at the end. Now, the next section in here is on dual agency. The first thing that they're going to initial here is that they saw with you that brokerage relationship disclosure. Remember the one that we started with? They're going to initial that they have seen and the agent has discussed that with them. Now, here's the permissions. Again, this is going to be different from what we do in our agency agreements in North Carolina. Agency is included in the agency disclosure. It is not here. This is said, the only thing we have here is the permission to either, or the permission is not granted, that they won't consider it, or they're going to give us permission to consider dual agency or consider designated agency at the time we get an offer. So obviously what we want is this right here. We want them to consider or allow us to bring them an offer and discuss at that time if they're willing to go into a dual agency agreement, or if they're willing to go into designated agency. So It's not the decision to do it. Help them to understand that. It's for their consideration at the time that we will come back to them. Now, when we come back to them, and if you are totally welcome to give them these forms up front. They just don't have to sign them. These are the forms. There's the dual agency agreement and the designated. Now, let me point out something to you. You see this thing right here? That's the seal of South Carolina. That seal on this document means this form was released by the legislators. It is law. This was released and put into being by the legislators. If you don't see that seal, then you know they're copyrighted by the South Carolina Realtors Association. The commission tasks the Realtor Association with designing the forms and releasing the forms, which they've just done this last week. But there are a few forms, like the broker relations form we just went over. These two forms on agency, those are state legislator released. So again, just a point of reference. This dual agency, it is pretty thorough. You don't have to go into every aspect of it, but again, assure your seller that when a buyer is identified and you're going to possibly present them an offer, you will go through this dual agency addendum very thoroughly with them. I wanted to point out that generally on the dual agency, you would have the brokerage name here, and broker or associated licensee, you can sign here. Broker in South Carolina is typically the broker in charge. They do not recognize you as brokers in South Carolina. You are sales licensed folks, so salesmen in South Carolina. Most of you, some of you have gone the extra mile and gotten the broker, but generally when you see the term broker in South Carolina, that means the big. Or a big has assigned or allowed you as the licensee or sub-agent of the firm to sign, and they've already included that here. So you can certainly sign this once you go through the designated agency thing. Keep in mind that dual agency with the firm has to be agreed to prior to the concept of designated agency. You do not need to get this form signed if you're going to get the designated agency signed. If you're not going designated agency, you are the individual, you're going to work for the seller and you're going to work with the buyer. This would be the form that you would need to get signed. This form is only needed when it's you being the individual who's going to work both sides. Now, let me show you the designated agency form. It looks very similar to that one. This is your designated agency agreement. Before I forget it, designated agency can only be with agents within our Keller Williams franchise. Keller Williams offices, are individually owned and operated. So you cannot have dual agency or designated agency with somebody, let's say from Fort Mill or Union County. Those are all individual businesses in their own right. So, but if it's another Ballantine agent, let's say Wendy's the listing agent and Whitley is the buyer's agent, you're both with the same firm, right? So initially you consider that dual agency. The only way that the two of you can process this paperwork is to get the designated agency agreement, whereby we are designating Wendy to be acting as the listing agent, and Whitley is going to be designated as the buyer's agent because you all have agency agreements already placed to that effect, right? But this is the form that ties it together and allows you to function in those independent roles. Remember, on a dual agency, nothing's kept confidential. Everything has to be shared that on both sides. Not so in designated. Designated agency, the designated agents can still follow the rules of fiduciary duties to their respective client. Now, on this particular form, on the back side, you'll see under number 7, you'll see these lines here. The associated licensee supervisory broker is, and that would be my name. Then here is where we're going to put Wendy's name because she's representing the seller. And here's where we're going to put Whitney's name because she's representing the buyer. And then we're going to get the signatures of the sellers and the buyers. And again, the firm and signed by you so that everybody knows how the representation is going to go, particularly in negotiation. Okay. Now, what the pattern of this would be, the buyer's agent who is writing the offer, it's called agreement to buy and sell. The buyer's agent is going to get this form completed by the buyer, and they're going to put this information in right here because you've got the MLS sheet, you know that. So you're going to put the information in, and along with the agreement to buy and sell, when you present it as an offer, you're going to have this form to go with it. Again, you already know that it's a Ballantine agent from your MLS. So fill in that Ballantine agent's name along with your name and my name and give it to the listing agent to present to the seller. And then the seller signs it in their agreement. Now, remember back the permissions and the choices we talked about a little while ago? That's when you're going to make sure that they have this form and have it signed. And again, go through the explanation of what it means to be a dual agent or a designated agent. All right, now let's remember these are separate forms. We got lots of different forms that are individual forms on the South Carolina side. Now let's go back to our listing agreement that we were talking about. The term, this is your the price that you write it out like a check. You got to write $200,000 and $900, whatever it is. You're going to write it out by words like you're writing out a check, okay? And then you're going to put in here the numeric numbers. And right here is where you're going to put the total commission. The total commission. Now, I guess you could say in general, we expect 6% there, right? We're not seeing that across the board. Sometimes we're seeing 7 and 8, and unfortunately we're seeing some 4s and 5s too. But let's use 6 because that's the round number that we're more comfortable with, or we've seen more. So you're going to put a total fee. You see the total. That's going to be your 6%. Don't think this is the listing side commission. Sometimes people put 3 or 2.5, whatever it is here, and you can't do that because on the next page, look over here, the next page is where you're going to say, but I'm going to share a part of my total with a buyer agent. And that's the only one you're going to share with. We're not going to share a dollar amount. We only share a percentage. We don't do transaction brokerage, where it's non-agency. So those are dashes in those blanks. Nor do we do sub-agency. Sub-agency is you working for your seller or you working for your buyer. If you've got a listing, you don't want an agent from another firm trying to represent your seller. You had a hard enough time learning all that stuff yourself to represent them, right? You sure don't want a sub-agent from another firm to get paid for doing what you are doing and have done. So our firm, again, we do not cooperate with sub-agents from other firms. We are the sub-agent, all right, and agency agreement. So the only one you're going to be cooperating with is going to be buyer agency. And yes, I know that through the years, it has been pretty much equal. If we collect 6% as the listing agent, the buyer's agent could most of the time rely on getting 3%. I've been in the business almost 40 years, and it has been so much the pattern of seeing 6% and 3% on each side, or whatever we got, it was equally shared. Prepare yourself right now. That is not what's happening in the marketplace. It is definitely not shared equally in the majority of the listings right now. Even if it's only a 0.5% difference, we're seeing if you got 6%, we're seeing a lot of 3.5% that stay with the listing firm, but you're willing to split 2.5%. You do need to help your sellers to understand that when they offer a lesser amount to a buyer's agent, that does affect the sale. And one of the things that National Association of Realtors is working on, because the Department of Justice has taken them to court over it, is that buyers agents now may have to get some of their compensations from the buyers. And we are told with a lot of intensity, do not ever say your services are free. They are not free. They are just rearranged on the CD. So you cannot use that phrase anymore. For years, it was kind of like marketing, you know, it would to tell buyers that they can work with you because it doesn't cost them anything. Don't say that anymore. That's not acceptable. So you cannot say that anymore. In fact, it's getting to the place now that we're probably going to have to be more open about disclosing what we are making as buyer's agents. So when you're talking to the sellers about the splits as to what you got to put on the front page, that's the first thing. That's the main thing the seller is concerned about. But then when you go over here on the second page, where you talk about how much you're going to offer to the buyer's agent, that also has to be agreed to by the seller. And if the seller has opposition to what you suggest, then you're going to have to negotiate because we are seeing lesser buyers agents commissions, and therefore a lot of discontented buyers agents. It does make a difference in the transaction, but it's the world we live in right now. So okay, back to page 1 here. We're not getting very far very fast, are we? We're covering a lot of ground though. All right, so right here, you're not going to put a dollar amount. Remember, we work in percentages. We do not work in a dollar amount. So this is where you would put the 6% or 5% or 8%, whatever you agree with your seller. Down to the bottom here, this is what's called a protection period. A protection period is designed for a seller who thinks that they can wait till the listing expires. And when it expires, then they can work with that buyer that you brought in and maybe cut out the commission. Well, the form writers put this little paragraph in there as a protection that if they were to try to do that, they would still owe you a listing side commission up to the days that you put in there. I just kind of chose 90. I've used it through the years. I don't see any reason to go less or more. You can put any number of days in there you want to. Sometimes people put 15, some put 30. But like I say, for me, 90 worked real well. I don't see any sense in going any longer than that. But anyway, that's your protection period. I got to tell you, it's not the strongest argument that you'll have to try to get paid, but it is a legal argument. So make sure that you put something in that blank. Now, all these other paragraphs are more or less what you are going to do and what you expect the buyer to do. The seller to do. So the owner. So you might want to highlight some of these, the duties. Right here, I wanted to point out to you, every now and then you'll have a seller owner who is maybe out of town or maybe even out of the country. And they want you to be responsible to make some payments on their behalf, such as a lawn care maybe. Or if they had a plumber and the plumber's not going to do the work until you pay him, some sellers want to authorize you for an amount. I would discourage that. These days with Zelle and Venmo, whatever, they can transfer monies pretty quickly and easily. I think an owner needs to be responsible for their own property. I do know that maybe it's a military person who is abroad that could not have access to do some of the transfers. You might reconsider under that circumstance, but by and large, don't make it a best practice to offer to take care of funds that the seller needs to expend. Okay, let's go on down here to, again, all of this are basic things of what you're going to talk to them about from the listing standpoint. But what I've basically shared with you thus far are the two or three biggies that you need to have direction in early on. Here's that paragraph again, what we're going to do with the MLS and those two forms that you're going to be using. Lock boxes, you have to have permission to put a lockbox on somebody's house. So it's in the North Carolina agreement and the South Carolina agreement that you get their permission, or if you don't have their permission. But boy, you sure do want it. And I would caution you, don't use combo locks. Combo locks are just like my little notice says internet connection is unstable. Those combo locks are unstable. You don't have a record of who's gone in the house, particularly if the house is lived in. Goodness gracious. You definitely want to have the security, or hopefully the safety of having a lockbox. And a lockbox, I know they're expensive. Buy you 2 or 3 and shift them around, or borrow one if you don't have one yet, so that you can put a lockbox, a super lockbox on your listings. Look at this right here. Other offers. Owner understands that the broker's responsibility to present offers to purchase to the owner for owner's consideration terminates at the closing of the subject property or expiration of this agreement, whichever comes first. So you are going to have to present any and all offers until the day of closing or the day of termination of this agreement. You have no further obligation past that date to present any offers or try to work anything about that listing. One other thing I want to show you here. This right here, these two things. Photography. Oh my gracious, copyrights on photography has got to be a real booger lately. Do you know who has the copyright to photography? The photos? It's the photographer. It's not you. You think, well, I should have the rights. I paid for them, or the seller should have the right. The seller paid for them. In some instances, you get the seller to pay. Not so. The photographs are the property and copyrighted by the person who took them. And I hope you're using professional photography so you can compete well. So you really do need an agreement of some sort with the photographer. Do you have access or do you have the authority to use those photos beyond that one instance of putting it in MLS for that one listing? Worse, I was listening to something on National Association, a webinar last week, and I could not believe the different scenarios that can come up on these photographs, but I guess one of the first things I want to caution you, don't ever borrow the photographs from a previous listing. No. We've had an issue with somebody who wanted to, I think they were going to do a rental on a property, and they thought they should be able to use the photographs. Well, my agent came to me and said, well, can they do that? It's my photographs. I paid for them. And I said, well, guess what? You're wrong on one account, but you're right on the other. You're right, they can't use it, but wrong with the fact that you just because you paid for them, they're not yours. So you have to go back to the photographer. I don't see that many agreements in our area, but apparently from what NAR is saying, we're going to have those. The other thing here is this right here, surveillance. You do need to warn the seller that they cannot sit down in the cubicle at Bank of America and watch everything that's going on in their house and they need to know the surveillance rules of audio and video in their area. Right here, and I think this is strange. Seller agrees that the broker may or may not disclose potential surveillance. Why would we not have the right to tell them that there's surveillance in that house? I don't understand that. I think buyer's agents and listing agents should be able to do that. But again, that's my personal opinion. You're given the option. If they say no, then you have to abide by it, right? Now this right here, remember I told you about the fixtures addendum? This is where you're going to add it if it's a part of the contract. Coming soon, no-show status. If you've got one of those addenda that I showed you a minute ago, you got to list it right here so that it's a part of this listing agreement. Or if you choose the firm exclusive instead of the coming soon, then you're going to put the firm exclusive. If you get in the situation that you have gone into the firm exclusive and the seller then decides they want to go active with public marketing, you've got to come back to this agreement and scroll and scratch through or mark through this and get initialed. And you can put a date, public marketing to begin such and such a date, and get the initials there. In North Carolina, we have an agency agreement amendment, which is 710. Is what we use. But in South Carolina, you go back to marking through and put your change right here. And that's how you would be able to switch from firm exclusive to the public marketing. That is your listing agreement. Basically, they don't have an additional signatures addendum in South Carolina, but they did increase the number of spots for people to sign. You see, you've got 4 owner signatures here. So if you're dealing with an estate and you've got some heirs, that maybe if you've got at least you get at least got 4 places for heirs to sign. I'm finding most of the time there's more heirs than that. We had one that was, I can't remember now, it was 27 or 31. There was an immense number of heirs that we had to get signatures on. So, but 4 is better than 2 that we had before. They do not have something called an entity signature space for an entity to sign. You know, an entity would be an LLC or a corporation or a trust even. They do not have an entity signature. So an entity would still sign on one of these lines here. And again, down here, we've got the firm's name and your name and license number. Always want to put your license number. All right, now we've gone through pretty much the listing agreement. I've done it pretty quickly. Please feel free to ask me questions. I know I've been kind of talking pretty fast to try to cover everything, but don't hesitate. I don't get upset at all when y'all have questions. While I'm scrolling, y'all might have one. Let me know. But I got to tell you, I can't watch the chat box, so don't put it in chat. I'm generally too busy thinking of what I'm doing about the forms. We've gone through all those. Let's go through that here. Now, come on. The wire fraud, there's that form again. Now, this is the residential property disclosure. Notice this right here. There's that seal again. And if you'll notice in North Carolina, there's the North Carolina seal on the residential property disclosure too. That means anybody, any seller is supposed to use this form, whether they're for sale by owner, listed, unlisted, whatever. Everybody has a right to have that disclosure. So it's not controlled by the copyright rules of South Carolina realtor forms. Now, right here, owners should answer the questions fully, honestly, and appropriately by attaching documents, checking a box for each checkbox question, and writing in the blanks of the disclosure statement. Make sure the sellers understand that it is law that they are to present this with you or without you even. And this is one of the few forms that you can give to a for sale by owner. Typically, you cannot share a form with someone who is not a realtor or realtor member. You can't share the forms without the watermark. This is copyright or sample on it. But these disclosure forms, you do give these without the watermark. South Carolina does not have a mineral and oil and gas rights disclosure. South Carolina does have the lead-based paint disclosure. That's a national disclosure. So you in South Carolina would only have 2 of the 3 disclosures that we're pretty comfortable with, those of us who've been doing the North Carolina side for a while. So make sure that you get the residential property disclosure. And that is, I was going to show you here, there is no number on the South Carolina form. You'll generally see a revision date. This was put into practice last April. That's another thing. In North Carolina, your forms are going to change every July 1. And when you look for the date of the copyright, it's going to be the pretty much the current year. If it's past July 1, it's going to be July or 7/1/2022. And those forms, unless there's a rare exception, those forms are going to be effective and useful until 2003 July. South Carolina releases forms whenever they want to release forms. They will. So you're not ever going to know what the current form is, but honestly, without using the forms programs or without using our little comparable form titles of the forms, that little cheat sheet I told you about earlier, I do try to keep all those updated for you. And one of the most common questions I get is this really the current form when it was done in 2017? Yes, it really is. So just know that the form, the copyright dates or the revision dates might not be what you would think is current. This one just happens to be a pretty good one. Let's scoot on down here. One of the first things that the first thing that you have to deal with on the residential property disclosure is your water supply and sanitary sewage disposal system. Those of you who've been with us for a while know about our in-house form called septic or sewer and water disclosure. That's the form that we're trying to keep you all out of trouble. We're trying to keep you from having to spend some of your hard-earned money. But that particular form has to be with every listing and every buy sell. So they started off right here at number 1. What is the water supply? Is there water supply? Where does the supply come from? Okay, what is the source of supply? And again, it's pretty much right in this section here. You want to find out if there is a septic, or is it on sewer? Is it private? Is it corporate? Corporate would be like a condo, or it could be a community service. So if you'll go ahead and get your seller to fill this out, and you do the septic or sewer and water disclosure, then between the two of you, hopefully you'll find the truth of the matter. I think it was just yesterday, maybe it was the day before. Again, somebody, one of my agents was telling me that they had an offer on this property and the listing agent had listed it incorrectly. And when he called to tell her, he said, my buyer tried to make an offer. I mean, tried to initiate service, and the county said that you don't have county septic, county sewer. And you know what the listing agent's response was? Well, oh, I'm sorry, I've changed that. Oh, duh. Why didn't you find it out in the first place? So anyway, that's what we want you all to do. Find it out in the first place. What if we had already gone to closing, or we were going to closing? And then that's when you have a lawsuit on your hands, and we don't want any of that. All right. That's why the little form is so handy for you. In fact, he was being very nice. He said, "I'm so glad that you have us do this because my buyer would have been very upset had he found out it was septic." And he said, "I'm not sure what he's going to do now that he has found out, but they're working through it." Now, there are several sections of questions. Again, you are encouraging the seller to answer these questions as honestly as he knows or she knows. You cannot make them disclose something that they don't want to disclose or disclose it differently than they want to. You cannot fill this out. You can be there and kind of guide them through it, but you cannot fill it out. Don't you put pencil to this paper. All right, this is a seller's disclosure. Then you can verify some of it, but you want to make sure you don't do it on this particular form. This form was changed last April, and the way it was changed, I'm going to show you this right now, had to do with the HOA. If this house is in an area that's governed by the HOA, that's the question right here. All right, is it, or if it's not, then obviously you're going to check here, and you see that little asterisk. If it is governed by that, they have to attach. Let me show this. This is so funny. It's so South Carolina. There is a single form, and it's the single form will print out when you print out the residential property disclosure. It has no number. It has no, look here, that's just the form right here. If you look at the bottom, it has no number. It has no date that it was revised or published. It's just this little form. And if there is an HOA, you need to fill out this form. If there is not an HOA, just ignore it. All right. But it still has to be, evidently they couldn't figure out how to get it out to people. So they just lumped it together with a disclosure form. So you see, it says page 5 of 5, and then you just got this other form here. It's not page 1 of 1. It's not page 6 of 1 of 6, or 6 of 6, I guess. So don't be confused by that. It's just the way it is. All right. So that was a new thing that they added in April of last year. The only other thing they added was about the roof, the age of the roof, and that's not always easy to find, but hopefully the seller does have some idea. And please, when you're advertising, don't say new roof or new HVAC if you haven't seen an invoice that says it's new. I might go buy me a new car, but that car might be 7 years old, but to me it's new. Same thing with the roof, or same thing with the HVAC. Sometimes we think it's new because it just seems like we just put it in last year, but not. So always ask for an invoice to make sure before you advertise that it's new. There are some additional questions in here, and that we don't have on the North Carolina side. We want to put owner occupied. Is the property that we're selling, is it leased or has it been leased? Is it a short sale or foreclosure? We haven't seen those in years, but it looks like we might begin to see some of those. Is it a bankruptcy? We're seeing many more estates. And by the way, they have the same exemptions in South Carolina as they do in the North Carolina. If it's a foreclosure or an estate or new construction, and again, there's no MOG, but those are exemptions for the people who have to fill out the residential, the people who don't have to fill out the residential property disclosure. And I'll be glad to send all these forms to you and send you that exemption sheet as well, so that you'll have that in black and white. Okay. Just make sure that I have your email address so I can send it to you. All right. The next thing I wanted to point out to you, they have a form. Anyway, this is just saying the things that the homeowners takes care of. Now, there's a form about flood insurance disclosure. Again, this is a form that's unique to South Carolina. We do not have this in the North Carolina. We do have to note in our listing agreement in North Carolina. If there is flood insurance, we do have to disclose that. But at the same token, we don't have a separate form, and they actually have the separate form. It is a really, really best practice, good idea for you all to look up the flood information before you put it into the MLS. Sellers can tell you if they pay an extra premium any given year for flood insurance. They obviously know, because it could be several $100s, and it's not paid with homeowners insurance. It's a separate insurance, and it's paid annually. So make sure if they do have insurance that they disclose that to you, because it could very well be that a buyer would go to buy that house, is a mortgage, and not be able to get it because there's flood insurance, and that could cause them not to qualify. So make sure you find that out. Okay. And let's see, there's a couple of websites on here for you to be able to look up things. Now, if you're listing a property in an area like Sun City, for instance, there's several other communities that are 55 and above. Four Seasons, I believe, is in South Carolina. There's some other 55 and above communities. Every listing in a community that's 55 and above has to have this form to go in with the listing. MLS requires it, even though they know Sun City is 55 and above, they have to have this with every listing. All right. So if you're listing in one of these communities, make sure that you get, and it's just a simple form verifying that they do have the right for their credentials to be to claim 55 and older. All right. So and this basically explains it right here. So you want to have that because it has to go into the MLS. Now, this is that septic or sewer and water disclosure I told you about a while ago. This is nothing in the world but CYA. Absolutely nothing in the world. And it's not to cause you all problems. I promise you, I'm not trying to make you work harder than you already do. I know, I'm a realtor. I know how hard it is to keep up with all this paperwork. This is the form that if you have a utility bill, oh, that's the easiest of all. If you have a utility bill where you can look and see if that utility bill shows water and shows stormwater and sewage, then you're covered. You've got it right there in proof, and you know right off the bat that it's okay with the city, county, you've got it. If it's community, hopefully the seller is going to have an invoice, or they can tell you who they write that separate check to every month. If it's a community, they're going to be paying, it could be $60 or $70 a month extra for one of those services that's not included in the city, county. Most of the time it's one or the other. It's rarely community for sewer and community for water. Okay. So make sure to ask if they have a community service. You don't have very much. But these are things for the agent to verify, and that's what you're doing. The thing that you most the most work you have to do is this one right here. If it's not on sewer, city, county sewer or community, then the only other option is going to be septic. It's a private septic tank. So you've got to find out if that septic tank is designed to adequately service a house with the proper number of bedrooms. And so the proper number of bedrooms is going to be listed on the permit. So you got to find a permit. So the way you get a permit is you're going to contact the Environmental Health Services Department in the county, let's say York or Union or Mecklenburg, whatever county. You're going to call, and that's a separate department. Okay, that's not the utility department. You're going to call Environmental Health Department, and they can tell you if there is a permit for that particular house, or parcel ID. They might ask for the parcel ID, and if the permit's older than about 6 years, a lot of times they can't find it. They pretty well purge those out and archive them, and they keep active for about 6 years. And you can get a copy of that from that county. Not too long ago, one of my agents was really annoyed with a listing agent who would not spend $10 to get that septic. It's like, come on, grow up. This is a business. You need to provide that. I don't care if you charge it back to the buyer or the seller at closing, but get it up front so that you can take care of your client, whether it's a seller or a buyer. Some counties aren't charging you anything. I think it's Union County that charges 10, but it's really critically important that they know where their water is coming from and how sewage is disposed of. If you can get a permit, you're going to check right here that it's obtained, and you're going to initial or check that copy is attached. If you tried to get it and you cannot get it, then you want to make sure, see where it says not, make sure that you say you call these people on such and such a date, you spoke to Nancy and it wasn't available. That's all you have to do. That gives you written proof that you did your job. Okay. Now up here is the critical thing. If it has a septic and you advertise 5 bedrooms, it better have a number 5 in that blank that says the bedrooms on that permit. If it has a number 3 for bedrooms, you can't advertise it as a 5-bedroom. It's a 3-bedroom septic that's going to not be able to handle, supposedly, the number of people that would be in a 5-bedroom. Now, we had a builder, and I hear that builder was coming back to town. I was really kind of surprised. They came in here years ago from Ohio, and they built what they call big boxes. They would build these huge houses with 5 and 6 bedrooms. And people were so excited to have all that space and they just lapped those things up like everything. Well, come to find out, the builder was only putting in a 3-bedroom septic. So when those sellers started trying to sell it, there they were with a 3-bedroom septic that had to be increased or exchanged in some situations. So make sure if you can find it, find it. If you can't, let us know you can't find it and put in your listing, not a septic permit not available. You know, obviously they had to have a permit to put it in, but it's not available. And that's all you're going to need to do. On the bottom here, on the signatures, if you're the buyer's agent, I want you to sign it, and I want your buyer to sign it, that you gave it to them. If you're the listing agent, only you sign it. The sellers put the information in that residential property disclosure. So the seller doesn't need to verify this. They've already told you what they think. This is your verification. Again, it's not something, and you do not have to get the buyer or the buyer's agent on a cross sale to do it. You do your work as the listing agent, and that's the only one that needs to be in the file. Don't think you have to get a buyer's agent to get all this information. They're not going to, and they don't have to, because it's an in-house form. I gave you a little explanation right here about how to use it. You may or may not choose to read that, but anyway, that gave you the explanation. So now here's a utility sheet. I would highly recommend that you use that. It'll give you a little clue right up front if they put on here something about the extra water bill or about the gas bill. People, when they're moving, and I talked to a lady the other day who was so frustrated with one of my agents. I think she would have strangled him if she could have, if she was already here from north. She said how it had been so hard for her to find all the different utilities in Rock Hill that she needed to find to be able to connect these services. And she said, I don't know the names of the trash services. I don't know these things. And I said, I know you don't, ma'am. And I'm really sorry. I mean, I'm having to apologize because my agent was too busy to get utility sheet. This is a convenience. It's a best practice. Is it required? No. But is it handy, and is it good PR? Yes. Just like I said, I just went through this with an agent. Let me show you one thing here. People don't necessarily know trash service. Most folks that are coming from, particularly in the northern areas, that's part of their taxes. They don't have to pay a trash service outside of their local taxes. It's a shock when they have to pay $60 or $75 or maybe $125 for trash services a month. So find that out so that you know, first of all, and so that you can pass it on to a buyer. Again, best practice. That one's not required, preferred. Professional services disclosure. We have a professional services disclosure that is part of our North Carolina forms. This is the professional services disclosure that was put together by an attorney down in Fort Mill, actually, and we've adopted it as well. This is an in-house form. It's a worksheet. I expect you to work with these worksheets. Again, it's CYA, guys. Not extra work. It's taking care of business, taking care of yourself in business and taking care of business. So you might want to use, it's not you might want to, I prefer you use it. On a listing, you do not have to use it. The professional services does not have to be used on the listing side. There's only like one or two things, and you don't have to use it, but I want you to show it to the seller because this is what the buyer's agent most likely is going to come in with. Again, these are the list of the things that the buyer is probably going to be inspecting during the inspection period. So just so the seller knows, in case they haven't done a buy or sell recently, know what's going to happen. Now, there's one section on here about surveys. Read this and be sure, understand this. I've got an agent who is caught in a survey encroachment thing herself right now. So because she decided not to spend the money to get a survey, and now she's got an encroachment issue that's probably going to cost her several $1,000s, not just a few $100s to get a survey. But all that to say, surveys are critically important. Home warranties, again, this is just a note about the warranty, and a sign, whichever your client is. If you are a buyer, the agent, then the buyer signs it, obviously the seller. Now, remember a while ago I mentioned about the fixtures addendum. This is the little form that you would use as a fixtures addendum. Again, an in-house form, not required for a cross-sell agent, but definitely as a listing agent, I want you to have it in your file. And so, and the seller has a copy so they know what's to be left with the house. And therein is only one more thing is the security system. Security systems themselves are pretty much built into houses. They're pretty much fixtures. They don't fall out when you turn the house upside down. But the service contract is the biggie, okay? The service contract is the one that has to be paid off at closing if it's not transferred to the new owner, or if the current owner or seller decides to transfer it to his new house. Then obviously there's a transfer fee. So you need to know what the transfer fee is. And mostly you want to know or make the seller aware that it's something that has to be paid off. It's a lien against the house. Okay, it's a third party. It's not part of our sales contract, but it is something from the standpoint of being associated with the fixture. So again, this is a worksheet for you that hopefully will make your life a little easier. Now, this disclosure, this is a lot, it's a vacant lot or vacant land disclosure. If you are the listing agent, this is required. I expect the seller to give you this disclosure, and I expect it to be in your file. If you are the buyer's agent, I cannot require the listing agent to do it because this, again, is an in-house form, but it gives you the questions that people are going to ask you, or gives you answers. How are you going to know about this without doing a lot of research? Unless the seller tells you, so start with the disclosure from the seller, and that will definitely open things up for you to know what you got to do further research on, for one thing. All right. So that is a really super handy. Again, it gives you the information that you need when people are going to start calling you and asking questions. Now, that basically that covers our listing folder, the forms and all that we use with a South Carolina listing. But I want to go now to, let's talk to you about you being the listing agent and you are, hey, you've got an offer, you've got a contract, or you're getting a contract. This is the new forms. I want to go ahead and introduce those to you. Now, next Thursday, from 1 to 3, we'll be talking about all the buyer forms, but I want to kind of go at this today from you as the listing agent receiving this new contract, okay, and receiving how to help your seller understand it. Now we have 2 new contracts. They're basically the same contract, and let me show you the difference. You see this word right here? This one says residential. This is for single family, townhomes, and up to 4 dwellings. If you have a condo, you are going to see this one. It says residential / condo. The numbers on these particular forms, you will see that down here. Number 300 is the one that's residential condo. You see the new date here, 6/2022. This is the condo. You won't use that all that much, but the difference on this one would be if there is no land involved. It's a condo and you would use this one. Probably 99% of the time you're going to be using the one that just says residential, because it has some land, and it is number 310. Again, 310, version 6/2022. You are not to use or to receive versions that would be dated prior to this one. All right. Now let's go through this. They call agreement / contract. They're really big on this, giving you 2 or 3 names for whatever's going on. And so this one is the agreement contract to buy and sell residential real estate. They give you some definitions right here. The party obviously is the buyer or the seller. The brokers have to be licensed, brokers in charge. They're associated real estate licensees and their sub-agents. A closing attorney is someone's licensed in South Carolina, and they can be selected or should be selected by the buyer to coordinate the transaction. Now you see this little line here? That little line just confuses the dickens out of all of us. There is really nothing required on that line, but that's a good place for you to start exposing the buyer, if you're representing the buyer, to where the earnest money is going to be deposited. And if you'll notice on page 2, there's a place where the earnest money is going to be held, and so you want to find out who you want to make sure that you have the name of the attorney's office, but you do not have to list it here. It's okay if you do, but the same token, it's really for you to start the discussion of it, because we don't hold trust money. Most firms right now have gone to having the attorney hold them. So you rarely are going to have a firm that holds it if you're representing the buyer. But as a listing firm, you're the listing agent. Remember, you're receiving this from the buyer's agent. Then you're going to make sure that they understand that we don't hold trust, that it has to go to an attorney. The effective date is no different from North Carolina. It's the date that everybody has signed the contract. One difference in the South Carolina contract, it doesn't talk about the communication of the offer. It's just the final date upon which all the signatures have been signed. It talks about delivering notice. Notice would be communicating, but that's just a different title for it. Good funds again is different. Good funds in South Carolina is just the United States dollar. That's what's called good funds in South Carolina. And time, let me tell you, time is really important in South Carolina. You'll see a lot of forms that have date and time, because they, up until this new version, you had so many things that were geared on the time of the day. So putting the time and is really critical. And look at this right here. Time is of the essence with respect to all provisions of this contract stipulating a time or deadline of performance periods. Now, before I get into the form, let me tell you, the attorney who's been doing these webinars and helping us to understand this particular contract, he said the end of the due diligence period is 6 o'clock on a date that you're going to put in this contract, or you're going to see when you get the contract as the listing agent. At 6:01, that contract terminates as a due diligence contract. At 6:01, the contract becomes an as-is contract. The seller is on their way to closing, and the buyer is on their way to closing because they have not taken care of business before 6 o'clock. So, as I said, 6 o'clock is that's a time, and it's a time of the essence. And being a time of the essence, they mean it. You better have it settled by 6 o'clock. Otherwise, at 6:01, the buyer is moving ahead on the as-is contract. We're going to have some challenges with this contract. Again, we're talking about you as a listing agent now. When you receive this contract, you want to make sure that you schedule. I would schedule about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on that date, that I made sure by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I knew what was going to be happening for my seller. Either you're going to have an agreement to proceed as to repairs, or you're going to have a termination. So from your seller's perspective, you really don't care, but you still need to be, as a responsible agent, you need to be the one that by 4 o'clock that afternoon, you better be trying to lasso that buyer's agent and saying, hey, well, I need to know what is your buyer doing right now. You haven't turned in a repair request. You haven't given us any indication of if you're moving forward, if you're not moving forward as far as a termination. So I just want to remind you that at 6:01, your buyer is going to be in an as-is contract, and the seller will not do any repairs after 6:01 unless they're agreed prior. Okay, so you have to take the position sometimes, and you're going to have to do more so right now, because you're going to be dealing with agents who are not real comfortable with this due diligence contract. Now, let me show you what I mean. On Section 8, previously, under number 8, there were 3 options. I don't know if you've seen the previous contract or not, but there were 3 options. Those 3 options under this paragraph were, number 1, the seller paid repairs. That was a timeline in which by a certain date and time, certain rules, certain conditions had to be met, or you forfeited. So it was a pretty labor-intensive timeline that you had to keep up with. Then there was an as-is clause as an option, and the middle one was the due diligence. They have not changed the wording of this at all from what was on the previous contract. All they did was to remove the seller paid option and remove the as-is option. So instead of having 3 options, they took away 2, and we're left with the due diligence. And they call this a strict due diligence contract, which it is, which basically, and those of us who've been working in North Carolina, that is strictly a due diligence contract. The difference, again, in South Carolina, one of the differences is, excuse me, in South Carolina, the due diligence is placed in an area regarding repairs. However, there are 3 other contingencies in the South Carolina contract, and you must make your seller aware of this. Not only do they have the option under the due diligence to terminate for any or no reason within a certain date and within a certain time. Now look right here. It says due diligence period begins upon the effective date, the date of the contract is signed, and shall expire at 6 p.m. Remember, 5 p.m. in North Carolina, 6 p.m. in South Carolina. They just have to be different, okay? And it's going to expire on a certain date. That's not different from what you've already been using. It's 6 p.m. on a specific date, all right? If for whatever reason the buyer wants to terminate, they cannot live with something they found out during their inspection period, or maybe they just changed their mind, or maybe they didn't sell the house they thought they were going to. Whatever, they can terminate for any reason before this date. But if they choose to terminate by this time, this date, they cannot do so without submitting a certain amount of money, and that's called a termination fee. In North Carolina, we call it a due diligence fee, and it's collected up front. In South Carolina, it is not collected up front. They don't anticipate needing the termination fee. They are anticipating the buyer is going to go to closing. However, from the effective date to this date, for whatever reason, any reason, if the buyer terminates, the seller can expect to get this amount of money. This termination fee has to be in good funds, US dollars, okay? Without the fee, they may not terminate. Did you hear me? Without the fee in hand with the notice of termination, that contract at 601 becomes an as-is contract. It is not terminated. They can give you 5 notices of termination. It must have this fee along with the notice of termination, which is number 313. With those 2 items, then you can terminate the contract. So help your sellers to understand that they have a right, the buyer has a right to terminate the contract. Okay. It doesn't say what they're going to do with earnest money, though. And that's the number one question, particularly the buyers want to know. Well, the sellers do too. But the number one question is, well, what happens to the money? The earnest money in South Carolina can only be released in 2 scenarios. If there is mutual agreement by the parties or court order. There's only 2 ways that it's released: by mutual agreement or by court order. And there's a nice little, just a 1-page form if you wanted to put it in black and white and show it to your clients. I believe it's 620 is the form number, but it's called earnest money disclosure, and it states that very clearly. Well, it's stated in the contract too, but sometimes it's nice to pull those 2 little statements out and share it with your client. So you've got a contract, this agreement to buy and sell. It's been signed. The buyer decides they want to terminate. They give notice of termination, which is form 313. And when they give 313, there is a separate form that deals with the earnest money, and that's number 518. That 518 gives the option of how the earnest money is going to be released. Is it all to the seller? Is it all to the buyer? Is it split between the 2? Or have they agreed they'll go to court? Those are the options. We'll be covering those a little bit more next week, but I just wanted to introduce you as the listing agent to these forms, because again, you've got to introduce these concepts to your seller. All right. Now let me show you the alternative to all that I just said. Right here, there's 5 things itemized. In South Carolina, a repair request is done on number 525, SCR 525. If for whatever reason, when the buyer does the inspections and they find some items that they want repaired, if they're going to proceed with the contract, the seller looks at those items and the seller says, well, that's not unreasonable. I don't like it, but I'll fix, whatever they're going to fix. If they come to an agreement on that 525 as to what the buyer and the seller will do prior to 6 p.m., this 525 will amend the contract that they're in place with, and therein that becomes like an addendum amendment to the contract, and the due diligence option goes away at that time, and you proceed forward with the new amended contract that includes the agreement on what repairs will be made by the seller. So they haven't totally ruled out the negotiation on some repairs, but the difference is if they have agreed upon these repairs, it's going to be itemized on 525 in most of the time. There are 2 other forms that it might be on. These are general. This is that 390 is just a blank basic addendum that sometimes you might need to use. And 391 is something that's called clauses that can be added to the contract. And we'll talk about those next week more, but I just want you to have the concept again, as the listing agent, be able to help your seller to know that if they can come to terms on the repair request, which is that 525, that replaces the due diligence option. The due diligence option goes off the table. The buyer can no longer terminate by this time because they have amended the contract using this form. Is that confusing as everything? I generally, so when I'm talking with a buyer or a seller, I typically go through this list first, okay? I help them to understand that the buyer has the right to do in any inspection. All inspections are now going to be the buyer's responsibility to do and to pay for. In our previous version, there were times that the seller had to pay for inspections to justify a repair or to refute it. But in the strict due diligence contract, all the inspections are up to the buyer to do. The seller is not required to do inspections. The seller is going to see this form. And this is a new form. It's not a new form, it's an amended form because they had to make it fit with the words on the new 300 and 310. So you're not going to see that it looks that much different because we've been using the 525 for some time. You'll notice here, it's called repair addendum amendment. It's not called repair request. And I have to admit, it's hard for me to remember that because I think of it as a repair request. But again, it's a repair addendum amendment. And that's going to now be attached to the original agreement to buy and sell. And that becomes the new contract that voids the right for the due diligence. Now, watch this right here. These dates, again, remember, they're pretty sensitive about date and time. This paragraph right here, be very cautious on it because you've got some dates that you've got to be aware of. And these blanks here should be in descending order. If the buyer wants certain items repaired by, let's say, 10 days before settlement, they would put 10 days here, 10 calendar days prior to closing. If it's scheduled to close the 30th, they're going to want to have it 10 days earlier, which would be the 20th. Then at that by the 20th, the buyer should have a right to come in and inspect the property and make sure all the items have been repaired satisfactorily. If for whatever reason they have not been repaired satisfactorily, they are to give notice about 5 calendar days prior to closing, and give, or even 7 days, whatever time frame that you want to go on. They then are going to give the results to the seller. And right here, this is the seller's last opportunity to have all those things fixed if they wanted to close on time. And you might want to put 2 calendar days here or 3. Now, I'm well aware that you would like to have this many days, but you know, if being in the business a while, you probably already know things don't happen with ease when you get close to closing. A lot of times the repairs aren't done until 3 days before closing. This little paragraph right there can be a stumbling block to those sellers. So you take the responsibility of those dates, whatever the buyer brings to you, buyer's agent, and make sure that their seller will agree to those. All right. So again, make sure that it's a descending order, because you're going to start here and work down, so that when you get right down to closing, the repairs are done, they've been inspected, and there should not be an issue with repairs as you're walking in the door to go to the closing. In South Carolina, there is no grace period on the closing. There is one date, and that's the date you better be ready to go to close. If you aren't ready to go to close, you're going to have to get agreement by the buyer and the seller, and that's done on Form 390. I mean, a while ago I told you that's a general form, a general addendum. That's the way you would extend the closing if the parties agree. A seller might say, all the repairs are done, why should I agree to any extra time? You're going to need to know the scripts for that. All right. So you're going to, excuse me, you as the listing agent have to man the clock for your seller. The seller is not going to be nearly as conscientious about those dates. You have to drive that. You're the listing agent. And when I say drive, I mean remind, keep the focus on let's get those repairs done. Now, the repairs are listed right here. They did have some lines for us, but now they don't have any lines, where you want to itemize the items from the inspection report generally that you want repaired. Please don't just put a number like 1A or 2.8 or 2 whatever B or whatever. Write out what it says beside 1A and 2B. Write it out so that when this excuse me, I shouldn't say you write it out, because I want the buyer's agent to write it out for you. So when you present it to the seller, it's easy for the seller to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. If the seller won't do 1 or 2 of those, you strike through that line and get the seller to initial it. If the buyer is so lazy that they say, see the inspection report, and here's the itemized numbers, you take the responsibility of responding with an itemized list, which again clearly defines or shows what the seller is willing to do and what the seller is not willing to do, because you've itemized it out, not just put a number. As clearly as you can make this repair addendum, that it's going to be easier for everybody to understand and be in agreement of it. All right. So when you have it itemized and you can cross it out or not cross it out, and 2, when you cross it out, remember you got to have initials, because so you've got to leave enough room on the side there to get your initials. So make sure when you go through it that either you get an itemized list or you reply in an itemized list. They give you plenty of space to type and write, and for your DocuSign or your forms program, there's plenty of room to, in most situations, to write it out. Now that is the form that's going to change the contract. And when it changes the contract, you see right here, you're going to proceed under the amended contract. It's now been amended. If you don't get that agreed upon by 6 o'clock, you're going to proceed under an as-is contract. Or the buyer may upfront decide it's okay to go to as is. That's not always a negative. It generally is, because buyers want things fixed. But you're either going to amend the contract or you're going to go on with an as-is contract. And this right here is what we're most concerned with from the due diligence aspect, where they terminate the contract by timely and properly delivering notice of termination. That's Form 313, and the termination fee to the seller within the due diligence period. Now, let me tell you this little booger. I don't know how this is going to work. I'm really not sure how it's going to work collecting the termination fee at this point when the buyers are already upset. You see what it says? It says the termination fee and the notice of termination to the seller. It does not say listing agent. And they being the form writers, are saying it's best if we don't get in the middle of it. It's the buyer's responsibility to deliver that to seller. But I'm here to tell you that's probably not going to be a very efficient way of handling it. But what the attorney said was, if they don't do it, then they now are in an as-is contract, and they will have to legally get out of the contract, and the seller would have every right to sue for specific performance. So the attorney says he expects buyers to be responsible and honor the contract, and to deliver that fee and that notice to the seller. But if I was you as the listing agent, I would be on top of that like white on rice, because I don't think it's going to happen just for the buyer to deliver it. So again, y'all work together, work with that other agent. Try not to be adversarial with the other agents. The more you all can work together, once you get a negotiated contract, the more you can work together, the easier it's going to be for you all to be able to have a good closing, and hopefully satisfied buyers and sellers, which is hard to do these days, I promise you. That Section 8 is the biggest thing that you all have to be aware of. That, again, that's the change in the contract. All the other aspects of this contract are the same. That's the change, and that's what I wanted to point you all attention to today. And we are, goodness gracious, we are out of time already. But again, if you want me to send you this packet of forms, email me or text me or something. To my email is my full name, SABRAROMEO, like Romeo, at kw.com. Or you can text me or call me at 704-904-6625. 704-904-6625. Gosh, I'm so glad y'all joined us today. I hope that I haven't dumped the whole load on your head to choke you. I didn't mean to, but hopefully you've got some questions as a result of what we've covered today, and I can send you some forms, and happy selling down in South Carolina, and hopefully you get lots of listings, because we need lots of listings right now. But again, it's been a joy to get to see you today, and I'll see you later. If you want to,
Sabra, can I ask a question real quick?
well, of course you can, honey.
So every other week, is it 1 week's buyer's paperwork, the next week it's listing, you alternate every other week?
Uh-huh.
Okay,
And
Thank you.
alternate states, and it alternates states. The first Thursday is North Carolina listings. The second Thursday is North Carolina buyers. The third Thursday is South Carolina listings, and the fourth is South Carolina buyers.
gotcha.
And we
Okay.
alternate that, and we try to anyway. At least that's our goal. So and your Zoom link, as you all know, is in your calendar. You know, in the office calendar. So
Okay, thank you
good.
so much.
All right, love. I'll see y'all next week, hopefully.
Okay.
All righty.
All right.
Bye. Let's see if I can get out now that I got in.